All right, the first of 8 5 days, we're going to talk about the law of signs today. Our math humor. What's the difference between a teacher and a triangle?
Well, a teacher is always right.
Yes, we are.
I don't know how that's humor. So we're going to talk about 8-5 using the law of signs. Now, before we've been working with right triangles, and on those we use SOHCAHTOA to help us find missing side lengths or missing angles. Now, what happens if you do not have a right triangle? You can still solve for missing side lengths or angles, but you just can't use SOHCAHTOA because you're not dealing with right triangles. So anytime you do not have a right triangle, you're going to use either the law of signs, which we're going to cover today, or in a later video, you're going to use the law of cosines. So law of signs has to do with a triangle. Now let me go ahead and get this triangle drawn out, and I'm going to put the triangle A, B, and C, such that the sides opposite the angles, so opposite angle A is little a for the side, opposite angle B is little b, and opposite angle C is little c. So what we've got here is we've got some sort of ratio that we're going to be able to set up. If I take a look at the angle A, if I took the sine of angle A and I put it over its opposite side, little a, it would be in the same ratio as taking the sine of angle B and putting it over its opposite side, little b. Or I could even say it would be the same thing as taking the sine of angle C and putting it over its opposite side, little c. So there are two instances in which you might want to use law of signs. The first instance is when you know two angles of a triangle and then any one side of the triangle to find a missing side. So in our case, we've got angle of 88 degrees and 39 degrees, and we know one of the sides is 70. We're going to use this information to help us solve then for the missing side x. So I told you what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the angle. So maybe I start off with the angle of 39 degrees. So I would take the sine of 39 divided by, and we're going to put it over its opposite side of x, equals, then we're going to take the other angle, which is 88 degrees, take the sine of 88 degrees and put it over its opposite side, which is 70. Now, what you have to do in this case is you just have to solve for your variable. And the best way to do this with these is to go ahead and cross multiply. So when I cross multiply, I'm going to get x sine of 88 equals 70 sine of 39. Now I normally tell my students to kind of keep things the way they are and not just jump right on into solving and getting decimals, but to try to solve for the x instead of rounding this stuff right away. So what I'm going to do then is to solve for the x, since it's a multiplication, get it by itself by dividing both sides by the sine of 88. When I do that, I'm left with x equals. Now what I'm going to do is in my calculator, you are going to go ahead and type in 70 times the sine of 39, make sure you close your parentheses after the 39, and then divide that by the sine of 88 degrees. Normally when I'm solving for sides in this case, I like to keep it to the nearest tenth, so I ended up getting 44.1. So that was my missing side. The second case in which you would be solving using the law of signs is in the instance where you know two sides of your triangle and one of the angles opposite one of those sides to find the missing angle. So I could use this to help me solve for missing angles also. So here we go, we're going to set this up. I'm going to start off with the angle of x, so I'm going to say sine of the angle, because it's always the trig function and the angle next to it, over its opposite side, 5, is equal to, let's take a look at the other angle, sine of 110 degrees over its opposite side, which is a 12. So we're going to go ahead and cross multiply. So I get 12 sine of x equals 5 sine of 110. Next, notice that the x is being owned by the sine and it's multiplied by 12. So I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 12 to get it to the other side. Now at this stage, I've got sine of x equals. I'm going to go ahead and take this and throw it in my calculator. And when I do that, I'm going to get the decimal, but you are not going to lose that decimal, okay? You're not going to round it. You're going to keep it in your calculator so that you can use it again. So this is the decimal I ended up getting. It's sitting in my calculator. Now to get that angle, we've talked about this before. To solve for the missing angle, if it's sine of x equals this decimal, to get the angle, I'm going to sine inverse both sides. So I'm going to take x equals, and then in my calculator, I'm going to hit sine inverse, and then maybe second answer. Or you can type the decimal in again, whichever one you prefer. If you have questions on this, make sure you ask your teacher so you get clarification on how to do it. So I did second and then put that answer in there, and I get x equals. Now, since it is an angle, I'm going to round to the nearest degree, so I'm going to get 23 degrees. Now in our last example here, I'm going to want to solve for the missing side of x. The problem is if I'm going to use the law of sines here, I don't necessarily know what the angle is opposite of that missing side. Here's the thing. You do know you have 70 degrees for this angle, and you have 30 degrees for this angle, and there's 180 degrees in a triangle. So 70 and 30 add up to give me 100, meaning this last angle here is going to be 80 degrees. So I know I've got an 80-degree angle. We can set this up. So I'm going to do sine of 80 over x equals. Now in our instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the 16 because I know that choosing one of these sides versus the other is going to cause a problem. So we're just going to go ahead and work with this 12 here. So I'm going to take sine of 30 degrees then and divide it by its opposite side, which is 12. So we're going to cross multiply. So I get x sine of 30 equals 12 sine of 80. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and divide both sides by the sine of 30. That way I can get the x by itself. And of course, when you're doing this, make sure that you are closing your parentheses if you're putting it into your calculator all at once. That works out nicely. And when I get my decimal, I'm going to get 23 point, since it's a side, I'm going to round to the nearest tenth, and I end up getting 23.6. All right, so that's the last example for our notes. Make sure that if you have any questions, you write them down, you ask them in class. Also, make sure that you got your procedures down with your calculators and you understand how to use them. If you're not getting the same answers as myself, make sure you ask your teacher so we can clarify that and get on top of it. All right, any questions? Ask in class. Otherwise, have a great night.